In the game of Borderlands 4, it's often very easy to overlook some of the best gear in game purely because it doesn't have that legendary orange glow when it drops. And I think that devs know this, which is why some of the most powerful, or should I say overpowerful weapons in game are purple and sometimes even blue. Now, I'm sure you've all seen the videos now where people seem to have an infinite critical hit on every bullet and you're thinking, wow, what a cool glitch. But what if I told you it's not a glitch, but just an ordinary purple knife? So, this thing is just a purple rarity Jacob's throwing knife called the Booming Vivisecting Throwing Knife. The legend says it's hiding somewhere in Borderlands 4, and if you hit an enemy with it, all, and I do mean all, your damage becomes an automatic critical hit for 5 seconds. So today, we're tearing this legend apart, we'll look at what this god tier item does, and most importantly, where to find it, so stick around. Alrighty, let's break down this rumor. Or rather, not rumor. According to countless forum posts and whispers in the community, the Penetrator Augment is the single most busted, non-lethal effect in the game. The concept is simple. You toss the knife, it sticks in the target, and a 5-second debuff kicks in. During that window, every single point of damage you deal is a guaranteed critical hit. Doesn't matter if your weapon's critical hit chance is low or high, it doesn't matter if you have or hit a weak spot, it literally just becomes critical damage. Now, just think about that for a second. You could take the slowest firing, hardest hitting weapon you have in the game, and every single shot is a crit. You could fire a Torque rocket launcher and every bit of splash damage would register as a critical hit. At a bare minimum, it doubles your damage before you even factor in skills and other gear. And it gets even more ridiculous. There's even some variations of this knife that can roll with a secondary perk called a Damage Amp Payload. Now, this payload adds another debuff, making the target take an additional 15% damage for those same 5 seconds. So now you've got a 5-second window where all your damage is critical, and the enemy is taking 15% more damage on top of that. You can start to see how these numbers get ridiculously broken really fast. This thing is basically designed for boss melting, which is why that's all anyone is talking about. Now, the strategy is obvious. Tag the boss with the knife, then just unleash hell with your strongest weapons. And since the knife has multiple charges, usually 3, you can just reapply it if the boss somehow survives that first onslaught or the initial first throw of the knife. Not to mention that the damage amp payload augment seems to stack, so throwing all 3 of your knives at once will increase the target's damage taken by 45% for 5 seconds, making it utterly broken. It's a piece of gear that would define any build and work with any character. It's insane. Okay, so the knife sounds incredible, right? Game breaking even. The next logical question is, where do you get it? So the community, quote unquote, has zeroed in on a few key farming spots, but one stands out above the rest, a boss called Drill a Hole. So Drill a Hole is a boss in a region called Tonnage Peel, and it's become the go-to farm because it has a higher chance of dropping Ordnance type items. So the grind looks like this. Spawn in, run to the boss, melt it, check the loot, and then run into a back room with a red chest for a chance at it spawning in there. After that, you use the Moxie's Big Encore machine to respawn the boss and do it all over again. You know how farms work. Now another spot that gets mentioned is a boss called Splash Zone, a different area with a quick boss fight that drops a ton of purple gear. The problem is, many players have found out the hard way is that the knife is a world drop, which technically means that it doesn't have a dedicated loot source and can technically drop from any enemy, chest, or badass in the entire game. So like the sheer difficulty and randomness have kind of created a white whale for the community in Borderlands 4, I reckon. Everyone wants it, but it seems like no one can find it, but that's where we come in. So, we did it. We farmed Drill a Hole and Splash Zone until our eyes bled. Joking. We opened every red chest we could find, and the results were interesting. So there is some truth behind the farming of Drill a Hole, as it turns out he does have increased ordnance drops, so he's a very viable boss to be farming for this throwing knife. However, Splash Zone on the other hand is a complete and utter pass. Whilst he is by far the easiest boss in the game to farm, his drop rates have been severely nerfed since launch, and he's now a big old waste of time, at least in my opinion. Don't come at me in the comments if you want to farm him, go for it. Personally, a better alternative that I would recommend is the Ripper drill site boss known as the Ripper Roadbirds. It's slower than your typical boss fight because you will need to fight through dozens of enemies to get these guys to spawn in, but the knife drop rates were a lot higher on this farm due to the fact the Ripper Roadbirds drop the Spinning Blade legendary throwing knife. so your chances of actually getting a lower tier throwing knife is actually much higher, or at least it was for me. Personally, I got all 3 of my booming vivisecting throwing knives from this boss, so I would give it a try. Plus, at the same time, you also get a chance at the Wombo Combo Assault Rifle, which is probably by far one of the best legendary weapons in game, so that's always a plus, right? So, when you eventually get your hands on this throwing knife, what should you do? Well, personally, I would start to shift your gear in the direction of a high critical damaging build. So ignoring your character skills for now and focusing purely on gear, you want to stack your gear with 3 of the Deadeye augments. Now, Deadeye, like all of the other augments in Borderlands 4, has 3 tiers. This one granting you 30% increase in gun accuracy, which honestly doesn't matter all that much, 25% increase to gun damage critical hit, gun critical hit damage rather, tongue twister. And finally, this is the best part, every critical hit you land gives you 15% extra critical hit damage per stack for 10 seconds with a max of 5 stacks. So how this works is because your knife is going to grant you all critical hits, you will automatically get 5 stacks of this buff, constantly boosting your critical hit damage by 75%, along with the 25% from the second buff, giving you a total critical damage buff of 100% just for having the Deadeye augment maxed out. Now, apart from the Deadeye augment, you want to find any class mod and enhancement that will also buff this critical hit damage. So for instance, I managed to snag a deadly Prestidigital Dog of War enhancement, that was such a mouthful, that boosts my assault rifle critical damage by a further 75%. Obviously, I only use this because my main weapons are the Wombo Combo, because I run a critical / splash build on Rafa. But anyways, sadly the other 2 buffs have no use to the build, but I'm sure if you're lucky and farm enough, you'll get one that has all 3 helping to boost like damage, criticals in some way, shape or form. As for your class mods, this is purely up to you. I personally use the legendary Dancer class mod for Rafa, which doubles my damage when I use my action skill, so essentially doubling my critical damage all over again while also doubling my overdrive ability damage, which in turn means more critical hit damage when I use the knife. So yeah, however, farming for class mods with good secondary abilities to help with this build will be so freaking time consuming, but well worth it if you can score even more critical hit damage or weapon damage in general. Me personally, for some reason, Idolator Soul just does not like me. He kind of drops like the same Dancer class mod with shitty as secondary abilities. So yeah, unfortunate for me, I will still have to keep grinding away until I can find the perfect one to increase my critical or my gun damage even further. Now, the last thing I want to touch on for how else you can buff your critical damage is in the Specializations tab. If you put 10 points into Brute, which boosts your gun damage, and 10 points into Sharpshooter, you can then get the Killer buff, which increases your critical hit damage. So essentially, you can just keep stacking the Killer and Brute as many times as you like, further boosting your critical damage on top of all other things we just talked about. So all up though, without going into each character skill tree, you can boost your critical damage upwards of 200% just by having the right secondary rolls on your gear, as well as putting the Deadeye augmentation on 3 of them also. Now, sadly, you should all know by now the world drops are just RNG. It could drop the first time, or it could drop the 10,000th time. It's just luck of the draw, sadly. Now, whilst my critical damage is still pretty good, well, it's kind of insane using this throwing knife, it could be a whole lot better, and I will post a full critical build once I've managed to farm for better enhancements and a decent Dancer class mod, so stay posted for that video in the future. So there you have it guys, the booming Vivisecting throwing knife in Borderlands 4. This is one of the most broken weapons in game, so get your hands on it now before they patch it in the near future. But I'm curious, have you got your hands on this knife yet? And if you have, what are your thoughts on it? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you did enjoy this video and want more build breakdowns and myth busting guides, be sure to subscribe. But until next time everyone, happy farming.